Sangpola. Welcome to the RIX podcast. I'm your host, Sonam Yaington. As the education fraternity in the country gears towards the noble task of revolutionizing our education system, the RIX podcast is happy to bring this special episode on the Royal Academy, a king's vision for education, as a humble tribute to commemorate the 41st birth anniversary of His Majesty the King. His Majesty established the Royal Academy in Paro as a model school to foster a new approach to holistic education in keeping with changing times and demands of the 21st century. To ensure that our national hopes and aspirations are reflected in the classrooms of our future generations, clear and profound visions for reforms in the Bhutanese education system have been spelled through the Royal Decree issued on 113th National Day. The Royal Academy aspires to be a center for excellence, where education is a dialectical process that enables collaboration among teachers, learners, teacher educators, and researchers. We are delighted to welcome two faculty members of the Academy, Ms. Sonam Palden, the Emotional Development Coordinator, and Mr. String Nitup, the Cerebral Development Coordinator, to talk about the Royal Academy. Welcome to the RIX podcast, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and it's an honor as well as a pleasure to be here.
To begin with, if you could kindly introduce the Royal Academy to our listeners. What is the vision of the Academy?
So the Royal Academy, which is located in Pamitsa, consists of three centers. We have the school, we also have an education research center, and we have a teacher development center who works in synergy on the creation of Bhutan Baccalaureate, which is a system of education that strives to help learners actualize their potential across the 5 areas of development. And the 5 areas of development are social, emotional, physical, cerebral, and spiritual. And it is done so that learners can become constructive, contributory citizens of a just and harmonious society. The Bhutan Baccalaureate is an education system from Bhutan, which can be contextualized in any part of the world, which can be examination board agnostic. So the first institute to come in existence would be the education research. In the beginning, almost about 12, 13 years ago, the curriculum for the 5 areas of development emerged from a survey, which included responses from the Bhutanese people. And these people came from all walks of life. They were asked, what is it that they want their children to learn? And their responses to this particular question shaped what we call the curriculum for the 5 areas of development. Then the Education Research Center worked on putting together the framework and create a document which looks at the philosophy, the assessment, as well as the learning process. And then the next institute to come into existence would be the Teacher Development Center, who worked in collaboration with the Education Department of Oxford University, and they designed a 15-month professional development program for the first cohort of teachers at the Royal Academy. And the last entity to come into existence would be the school, which was started in 2016 with 60 students from 20 dzongkhags. And the number 60 because it was started off to commemorate His Majesty the 4th Drukgyalpo's birth anniversary, the 60th birth anniversary. So that is the Royal Academy in brief.
Thank you. Given that the first batch of students are yet to make their mark outside the Academy after their graduation next year or thereafter, on what basis does the three centers assess or ground the efficacy of such approach to education?
That's I think, a question that is asked to us quite often. And like Sonam mentioned, Bhutan Baccalaureate in itself is an evolving learning process. And we are constantly looking at how do we become better as individuals, as institutions, and as a system of education, the Bhutan Baccalaureate itself. And the first batch of our students who joined us in 2016, they sat for the national examinations, the BCSE examinations at the end of grade 10 in 2019. And the results that they produced were quite amazing. And that gave us the confidence that you could focus on the learning process of the 5 areas of development and still be able to do well in a national examination, which looks at the cerebral development in many ways. And so that's one area that we look at in terms of how do we assess our own efficacy. Then in terms of looking at how well this 5 areas of development have helped individuals become constructive contributory citizens of their own communities, I think we're looking at a longer time frame, because we'll only be able to see when these students graduate from the academy and go on to live their own lives, become part of various communities, whether it's in Bhutan or outside. And that's where we will only be able to see how well they have used the 5 areas of development in their daily lives to impact their communities. And that's something that the Bhutan Baccalaureate is trying to do, to keep track of the people who graduate from here and look at how well they are being able to use the 5 areas of development. In terms of constantly benchmarking ourselves with various institutions within and outside Bhutan who share similar visions of holistic education, and the learning process based on the 5 areas of development has been recognized by an organization called 100 in Finland, who looks at education systems or educational innovations that are doing very well across the world. So every year they pick 100 innovations. And since 2017, we featured in the top 100 innovations. And this is our 5th year that we've been part of the 100's global innovations. So those are areas that we are constantly looking at and benchmarking ourselves with to constantly evolve this learning process.
Thank you. Ma'am Sompalton mentioned on Bhutan Baccalaureate, which is something to look forward to. So how can the 3 centers work closely with reformers and stakeholders to assist in preparing a roadmap for 21st century education in Bhutan, as envisioned by His Majesty?
Yeah, so Tsering mentioned about how we're working with important stakeholders and institutions, not just within the country, but with a lot of institutions and agencies outside the country as well. So 100 in Finland is one. Similarly, we have from the very beginning, we have been working with the education department of Oxford University. And in the last 3-4 years, we've also worked very closely with the Ministry of Education in terms of designing and implementing teacher development programs for the teachers within the 20 dzongkhags in the country also. We've looked at leadership programs where principals from across the kingdom were called in. And this is a dream, as an aspiration that His Majesty had almost 15 years ago when he first became the king back in 2006. And since then, education has always been in the forefront. And I believe that the Royal Academy is thought of because he wanted to bring about these changes within the education system. And very recently, last December, His Majesty issued the Royal Kasho on education reforms. So if you look at the Royal Kasho also, not just thinking about what are some of the works that we have been able to do, but thinking about what are some of the works that still needs to be done in order to bring about that desired reforms as well as transformation in our own education system. I feel like there are a lot of possibilities as well as opportunities for all the relevant stakeholders within the country to come together and work on the Royal Kashrona.
Las, thank you. La. So, how does the unique approach to education adopted by the Academy reflect the changing opportunities and challenges? La?
Yes. So I think one of the challenges in many ways that education systems, not just in Bhutan, but across the world are facing is children learn content. And we are aware with the technology and with internet, the content just keeps changing. The maths that you learned 5 years ago, even ourselves, are almost no longer relevant. And the pace at which this is changing is really fast. So what we want to look at and the approach at the Royal Academy and in the Bhutan Baccalaureate is we use content to help learners develop the skills, processes, and watermarks. And that becomes the core of the learning process. And that is where, you are constantly trying to use the skills that you picked up. And that's where you can then use the skills that you might have picked up in mathematics to learn Zonka or learn physical development. So that's a term that we quite often use. It's called cross-pollination, not just cross-pollination of ideas and domains, but also cross-pollination of the roles that people play. So there's a lot of synergy between the three centers that we talked about at the Royal Academy. A teacher at the Royal Academy is also part of the research center as a researcher, and they are also faculty at the Teacher Development Center. And likewise, the most important role that the children play as teachers for their peers, as well as teachers in the Teacher Development Center as a to help the teachers in their professional development. So there's a lot of cross-pollination that needs to be looked at. And I think world over, that's something that the move in education is happening towards. You are no longer learning static content. What you need is the skills and the process of learning to be able to deal with any content that keeps on changing. And that way, and also with technology right now, you can do a lot of two things. One is individualization. So you can use technology to curate individual pathways for individual students or teachers. But at the same time, you can use technology to create communities, whether it's online learning communities, and it doesn't necessarily have to be teachers and students. It can be people from diverse backgrounds. And that's the opportunity that technology presents, where you can individualize things while at the same time you can also create communities and a sense of community, whether it's a physical community or whether it's a virtual community. Those are the opportunities that we see.
Las, thank you. La. And it is also interesting to note that the assessment and teaching plans are personalized according to the needs of students at the Royal Academy. La. So if you could kindly share something on this. La.
Yes. So at the core of the whole learning process, we have something called a roadmap. And roadmap is the way of giving a sense of ownership as well as the responsibility and accountability to learners. And when we refer to learners, it's not just the children. We're saying the teachers need to be constantly in a learning mode. So if you're not learning from your students, if you're not learning from your interactions with others, there's no way that you're going to be able to help somebody else learn. So in that sense, we create roadmaps, and the roadmap is based on our own backstories, the experiences that make each one of us up, the kind of experiences you have grown up as a child and the education that you have had so far. All contributes to your roadmap, your backstory, which then helps you identify your strengths as well as the areas that you need to improve in. And that becomes a roadmap. And all of us, whether it's students or teachers, create roadmaps. And when we begin, we collect a baseline for each student. And just about 2 weeks ago, we had our grades 8 and 9 students who've been away for a fair amount of time last year. When the schools closed, they were at home. They continued some experiences online, and they learned from their communities. So when they came back, we just completed a whole baseline program where we designed experiences for them to showcase what they have learned, but also figure out what are the areas that we need to help them in. So this baseline is then used to create individual roadmaps, which is a collaborative process between a teacher and student, which we refer to as mentors. So each teacher is a mentor, and they help their children create roadmaps, put down indicators of success. What does success mean to you? How do you see yourself growing in 2 weeks or in a month's time? And then that roadmap, along with the assessment that we do, which is almost the kind of review papers that we create. We create individualized review papers for each student. So if a Dzongkha teacher has 15 children or 30 students in their group, in their class, they will create an individualized review paper for the child to showcase what they have learned, and also challenge them with some other aspects of Dzongkha. And all these then culminate into an individual report, which is a combination of the roadmap, the reviews that are done, as well as the teachers and the students' observation of their own growth in the 5 areas of development. And also to take the skills, processes, and watermarks forward, we create something called cross-pollination reviews, which an example of it is, a question in English can be asked in Dzongkha, and you have to demonstrate your response through a mathematical solution. So bringing in various aspects of it together. So those are various ways that we look at. And also, I talked about the role that children play as teachers. So we get children to bring resources from their communities in the form of songs, dances, food recipe, patterns, which are then used in the learning process as part of the curriculum, the resources as part of the curriculum. And His Majesty's speeches and addresses are used to help children, learn speaking and reading and writing in Dzongkha and English. So we look at each student as resource providers to help each other learn.
That is very unique indeed, La. Thank you, La. And having tutored students following both the conventional Bhutanese education system and the new approach to teaching and learning at the Royal Academy, if you could kindly share with us some of your personal observations as educators.
I think the biggest difference between where I was and where I am at the moment would be in terms of the ownership that I have, in terms of the kind of growth that I want to see in myself. And that's the same kind of expectation that we have of our students also. Students come here and then they look at what is it that they want to learn and how is it that they want to learn. And Tsering just spoke about how the entire learning experience is very individualized and contextualized to the individual needs and requirements of each learners. So the roadmap is one area where these individualization and contextualization takes place. And a lot of your own growth and your own progress and development is entirely dependent on you. So you have a lot of ownership when it comes to what is it that you want to learn and how is it that you want to learn. Then the second thing is we do not look at content or knowledge in silos, whether it's maths, whether it's physics, whether it's chemistry. We look at it through the lens of cross-pollination. So everything is interconnected, and these interconnections can be looked at through the development of skills and to looking at learning as a process, like what process works for you and what doesn't work for you. If something doesn't work for you, how do you make it work? And in the process of observing the entire process, what are some of the values or the watermarks that you develop, whether it's a watermark of resilience, when you meet challenges and obstacles, you learn not to give up, but find a different way of learning that. So those are one ways. The other is as learners, whether you're an adult learner or whether you're a young learner, student, you have a lot of opportunities in terms of developing yourself, your passions, your interests. So for the grade 11 and 12, we have concepts such as the self-curated area. So at the moment, if you look at some of our grade 12 students, they're learning about astronomy, they're learning about dermatology, they're learning about artificial intelligence, they're learning about coding. So these are self-led learning. And it's really amazing to see that children at such young age become independent learners who are self-driven and self-motivated. So those are a few observations that I can share with you and the audience. Yeah.
Las, thank you, La. And who can attend schooling at the Royal Academy, La? If you could also share with us on how the selections are being done, La.
So Sonam mentioned about us starting with 60 students, and now we are going into almost 300 students from grade 7 to 12. And the most important criteria for us when we select student is the national character representation, which His Majesty's very clearly laid out that the school at the Royal Academy will always have children from all 20 Dzongkhaks in Bhutan. So that's an important criteria that we look at. So we have every cohort of student has representation from all the 20 Dzongkhaks. The numbers vary depending on how many students we take in a year. And then we have a mix of students from economically challenged backgrounds. The students who are part of Gebit Toze, the program that His Majesty's has initiated for a long time now, and also mixing that up with academic toppers from some districts. So at the moment, the student characters that the representation that we have of 300 students, around 70 to 80% comes from the Gebitoze, and then we have around 25 to 30% of academic toppers covering all 20 Dzongkhaks, which in many ways help us, like I was saying, the kind of resources that the children bring from their communities. So it gives a wider spectrum of things that we can collect from all 20 districts of Bhutan. For example, we have a collection of local stories or folk tales almost from various parts of the 20 districts of Bhutan. And likewise, we have a collection of patterns from the 20 districts. So those are the areas that we look at when we look at the selection of students.
Thank you, La. This is my final question. What are the future plans of the Academy and how does it plan to evolve to achieve its mission of harnessing or awakening the primordial wisdom of every learner?
Yes. So we've started with the Royal Academy working on Bhutan Baccalaureate, and our collaborations with Oxford. So in 2019, Oxford University conducted a study looking at the various educational systems in the world who strives to look at holistic education. So whether it's the academic boards of India or Thailand or Singapore or Japan or the US, and the systems such as the IGCSE and the IBs, and the report that was published by Oxford affirms that there is a place for Bhutan Baccalaureate in the world. So they, as a system of holistic education, and The Royal Academy's work will constantly be on evolving the learning process, and like Sonam mentioned, the process of the learning process can be contextualized in different parts of Bhutan as well as outside. And contextualization as a word is very important for us. We are not saying we can, what works in the Royal Academy in Pambisa may not necessarily work in, even within Bhutan, in Thimphu or in Trashigang. So if it doesn't work within Bhutan itself, there's no way it can work in any other part of the world. So it needs to be contextualized. There will be things that are similar, but the contextualization is the key part to making it work. And then, like we mentioned earlier, we are constantly collaborating with the Ministry of Education in terms of developing and conducting professional development programs for teachers within the ministry, and also helping them to contextualize and implement this learning process. And likewise, we are constantly benchmarking ourselves with the leading educational institutions in the world. And just about a month ago, we had looked at the OECD Learning Compass 2030, and they set out the kind of things that education systems and OECD should be trying to achieve in 2030. And we have something called a learning framework, which an annual learning framework, which sets out the way forward for the academy. And when we look at that, there is a lot of similarities between the OECD Learning Compass and the Royal Academy's learning framework. And of course, there are certain components that are different for these two institutions. But what we find out is some of the things that OECD wishes to achieve by 2030, we've achieved them in the last 4 years, and we are constantly trying to look at how we can evolve the learning process for ourselves. So that's in some ways looking at how the future plans for the Royal Academy as an institution, guided by His Majesty's philosophy of enriching the education system in Bhutan.
Las, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us our King's vision for education. And thank you very much for your time. With this, we come to the end of the program. We would like to thank all our listeners for joining us. Please do take care and stay safe.